Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast. Some people are great at flirting and seduction, but for others, like me, who don't have that natural charm and charisma, and basically stop in your tracks at any opportunity of flirting, this episode is for you. We are speaking to sexologist Anisa Varasteh to learn about the psychology of seduction. Hi, Anisa. Lovely having you on the show. How are you going?
Hi, thank you for having me. I am great and I feel very honored to be part of this episode and part of your show.
That's amazing. Likewise. I really curious to know. Tell us a bit about your approach when it comes to flirting and seduction. Give us a little bit of a glimpse.
So, when it comes to seduction, I think there is a science to it. So, there are some principles that you need to understand. And so, in a very small, very tiny nutshell, you need to create psychological safety as well as excitement and arousal. So if you're off, if you create too much psychological safety or too much arousal, that can go very wrong. So I'm here to tell you and teach you how you can create this balance.
Okay, that's a bit like walking a tightrope.
It might be, but I think once you have the knowledge, hopefully you feel empowered how to do it well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hopefully once I get the knowledge, it feels a bit more like cooking and like creating a balanced meal. But thank you. That was a great preface to our topic for today. But before we get further into detail, we'd like to get to know better. This is Have You Met Anisa? And my first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
I'm a dancer, so I dance in my spare time. And I also love reading, I love hiking and getting active.
Oh, so where do you like to go for hiking?
At the moment, I live in South Australia. So one of the hikes that I really enjoy is Mount Lofty and also Marie
Mhm.
hikes.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Do you like being in nature very often?
Yes, I love the nature,
Yeah.
absolutely.
What about nature makes you feel so connected to it?
That's a good question. I think I love greenery, I love the mountains. And so when I'm hiking, I feel that connection to the nature strongly versus when I'm at the beach. I think that's a very different feel for
Mhm.
me.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like green is very calming. There's a reason that um, the color green is used for like eco-friendly and all these to kind of connote relaxing, right, when it comes to design. So that's really interesting that you point that out. But in terms of media that you consume, what type of films or TV shows have you enjoyed recently?
I love European cinema, so I watch a lot of British TV shows or shows from Spain and France. So I've spent quite some time on BritBox lately.
Mhm. And what types of TV shows, like what
Well,
genres do you reach out for the most?
I think the most popular ones for me are crime TV shows,
Mm.
detective crime. Yeah,
Yeah. Is it like the mystery and the excitement?
I think it's a bit of that plus the enigma and the questions like what is happening or what has happened, and can this person discover? So a bit of problem solving and the puzzle.
Mhm. And if you had to pick one film or TV show, which would you pick?
I think it would be The Bridge. It's a Swedish TV show.
Yeah, what is it about?
It is, again, crime detective TV show. And it is a bit dark, which I tend to enjoy.
Yeah.
But it's very thrilling.
Yeah. What kind of darkness do they touch on?
Psychological thriller. So it's about multiple murderers throughout the TV show that, they basically, the things that they've done or the things that they're doing and the police is trying to prevent them. I think it's that psychological aspect that I really enjoy.
Yeah, that sounds really grasping almost. So my last question for you is, who do you look up to the most, either in your professional life or your personal life?
It would have to be my partner because of his resilience and his wisdom. Plus, I think that we make a really good team.
Oh, that is so sweet, and so adorable. And there are few people, maybe not that few, but not many people. I guess not everyone can say that they have a partner that they look up to that much. So, that's very nice to
Yeah, I
hear.
feel
Thank you
lucky.
so much for Yeah, thank you so much for sharing about yourself. I feel like we got to know you a bit better. Now we're moving on to the interview section and really getting to know the psychology behind seduction. But my first question before we really get into it is, how would you define a
Listen,
relationship?
I think relationship is any human connection, basically. We have many different types of relationships. We have romantic relationships, platonic relationships, friendships, professional relationships, all sorts.
And in your opinion, does a romantic relationship still hold the same meaning, structure, and importance as decades ago?
I would think so, yes. I think a romantic relationship, which is probably one of the most intimate relationships that most people have, has quite a significance, and it has always had throughout history because it is a human need. So I wouldn't say that it has lost its meaning.
Yeah, for sure. In that sense, it certainly has not changed in many ways. But when it comes to flirting, what is your definition of it?
That is a very good question. So I would think that flirting is a little bit different to seduction, but I think most people use them interchangeably. So for me, seduction is more of an umbrella term, and it may be non-verbal, it may be very indirect ways that we try to attract another person sexually. And flirting is a type of seduction, I would say, that is more verbal and is more direct.
Yeah, and it probably doesn't necessarily connote sexualness.
Yeah, you're right. And so I think one of the questions that many people ask is, what's the difference between friendly and flirty? And this is, I guess, what you were saying as well before, is that sometimes something can be within an intention of flirting, but it may be perceived as friendly or the other way around.
Yeah, right. That is really confusing to me. But do you think that flirting defines a relationship? Like, do you think it's necessary in a relationship?
No, I don't think it's necessary, but I think a level of seduction is important in any relationships. And it doesn't necessarily, seduction doesn't necessarily apply only to people who are single. I think even if you are in a relationship, you still want to seduce your partner. You still want to create some sort of positive tension in the relationship, because after being in a long-term relationship for quite some time, things can lose their sense of novelty and excitement. So it's important to create that sense of seduction in a long-term relationship as well.
Mhm. And are there like factors or principles of seduction? And uh, how can we apply these to long term relationships, especially where you mentioned that a lot of that spark in seduction can be lost after a while?
So as I mentioned earlier, seduction has two parts, and it's really important that we understand these two elements when it comes to seduction. So one is creating psychological safety, and one is creating excitement or arousal. And if there is too much of either of them, then things really won't work. You can't be a really good seducer. So effective seduction has a balance of that expression of desire and safety. So if you have too much safety and not enough expression of desire, you can get friend zoned. And if you have too much expression of desire and not enough safety, then the defense mechanism of the other person can basically come up and the interaction will shut down. So I'm happy to break it down into steps, like step by step, and then explain how to create safety and turn on.
Oh, yeah, please do. But before you get into that, I wanted to ask, what are some examples of safety, and what are some examples of the what was it that you mentioned?
Expression of desire.
Expression of
Yeah,
desire.
and
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, could you give us some examples of those two?
sure. So safety, for example, is making the person feel that they have an exit, that they can say no, that they don't feel pressured to do something. So that's an example of safety. An expression of desire is, for example, letting the person know that you are interested in them, that maybe you're interested in a romantic relationship with them or in a sexual relationship with them, but step by step. Obviously, if you've met someone for the first time and you just tell them, hey, I want to go to bed with you, that's too much expression of desire and not enough safety. So they probably run away. But if you also just create too much of safety and not enough of that expression, the person may not even know that you're interested in them, and they think, oh, you're a nice friend, you're a good friend.
So, in that scenario, what would be the perfect in between?
So I'll just explain and give you some examples. The first step towards seducing someone is understanding how you feel, because this is, in my opinion, a very important step. And sometimes it's missed, because if you don't feel an attraction towards the person that you're interacting with, it will just not work. And it may sound very obvious, but sometimes people try to seduce another person or flirt with another person when they don't feel them attractive, because they just want to get some confirmation or affirmation from other people that they're attractive, or even around their self-worth. So the first step is knowing if you are physically attracted to the other person or not. And it is a very, as I said, common experience, and some people don't know whether they're physically attracted to the other person. And one of the things that I teach people when I work with them and I coach them around dating and seduction is paying attention to your body. How does your body feel when you are in the presence of this person, or even when you think about them? Do you feel a sense of expansion in your chest? Do you feel butterflies, or do you maybe feel something in your pelvis? There are different parts of the body that can be involved, and it's about connecting to your body and understanding whether you are attracted to this person or not. Does it make sense?
Yeah, that completely makes sense. What is the next step?
So the next step is connecting to your sexual desire. And this is in the context of flirting or sexual seduction that we're talking about. So feeling that hunger that you have, your longing, the way that is showing up in your body, the sensations that I referred to earlier. So how do you feel in your body? Where do you feel it in your body? And I think for most people, this step is a very difficult one, because most of the time the messages that we have received throughout our life about sex and sexuality is that it's wrong, it's bad, it's sinful. So therefore, it's difficult for people to acknowledge and to connect with that sexual desire part within them, and to say that that's okay. I'm a human being, and it's an absolutely healthy part of my being. So for women or female identifying people that I work with, they are too afraid to connect with their sexual desire because they are afraid of slut shaming, because they're continuously being told that women who are in touch with their sexuality are sluts. So, and for men, it's again, a similar challenge is that the messages that they have received is that if you express your desire, your sexual desire, it can hurt other people, it's predatory, it's aggressive, it's bad, and it's wrong. So taking a step to acknowledge that sexuality is a healthy part of being a human.
Yeah, and it sounds like that would really help as well in portraying that confidence and embodying that confidence needed for flirting and seduction. So once you've identified those two things, what do you do then?
So the next step is to see if the other person is also attracted to you. Now, this is where things can get a little bit murky, because sometimes we may misread body language, and sometimes people miss this important step because they don't pay attention to the other person, and they just are so consumed by their own desire that they just go ahead and tell them or express their desire, which is an important step to make sure that you can detect a level of attractiveness from the other person, that they are attracted to you. And so it's one of the things that I recommend to people is to pay attention to nonverbal body language of the person, to see whether, for example, they are leaning in with a level of interest towards you, or they are turning back, maybe they just keep watching, they keep checking their watch because they're bored. So you really need to pay attention to these nonverbal cues to see whether there is a level of interest from the other person.
Right. I always find difficulty with paying attention to non-verbal cues because there's always like this element of what if. But what are like the main factors to non-verbal cues that we should be taking note of when it comes to this step?
So I think it's a skill that you need to practice in terms of paying attention to other people's body language. And you can practice that by just paying attention to people in general, in other contexts, for example, with your friends, with your colleagues. And when you notice something in their body language, verbalizing that. For example, I may say something like, Marie, your body is turned away. It looks like you are bored or you're not interested in the conversation. You may be right, and the person's like, yeah, that's right. Or you may be wrong, which is, again, fine, but they will give you feedback. And they're like, no, I'm not bored. I was just turning away to check something or whatever. So it comes by practicing, spend a little bit of time to practice reading body language. But I agree with you that it's sometimes something that doesn't come very naturally to some people, and it does require a level of effort. And in an ideal world for some people, it would just sit there with a pad of paper and a pen and say, hey, are you interested in this? What would you like? I think that would make life so much easier.
That would be so much
Yeah,
easier.
I appreciate that. And I think, and I don't think there is anything wrong with doing it like that. So if that works for you and it does work for some people, absolutely go for it. Like, there is no shame and there is nothing wrong with doing that. But I'm just trying to give you some tips as how this is done for most people. But I appreciate that
Yeah.
it may not apply to everybody.
Yeah. So, what is the next thing that we have to do after we figure out, once we've paid a bit more attention to the nonverbal cues, maybe kind of figured out a little bit about what they are feeling? Because we also can't really, even based on nonverbal cues, we can't necessarily assume what they would be saying. So
Exactly.
what do we do then?
Exactly. And I think that's a really good point, because in teaching seduction, the only thing that I can teach you is your intent, what you can intend to do. But what the impact is and what is read by the other person may be completely different. We can't control that. But I can teach you again throughout the conversation today some ways that you can minimize the risk of being misunderstood. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is understanding that seduction or even flirting is not a pickup line or something that you do just 5 minutes before you want to hook up with someone. It's creating an anticipation, it's a longing, and it is a dance. I'm a dancer, if you remember. So that's something that I've learned when in one of the workshops that I attended to in Spain. One of our teachers told us that you need to dance like red wine. And what she explained was that if you are pouring wine for someone and you want to do it in a very seductive way, it's not very attractive that the wine is in the bottle in this moment and then the next minute it's in the glass. It's beautiful when it's poured very slowly, and then you can see this beautiful color, this captivating color that is poured into the glass slowly, and then it's luscious, velvety color stretching from the mouth of the bottle to the glass. So it's the same when it comes to seduction, that it is a dance, and that means that you need to take maybe one step forward and get feedback, and then maybe one step back. So, for example, you may notice something in the body language of the person. Just as we assume that you think this person's attracted to you. Okay, so now you can escalate a little bit. That means, for example, if you were talking about something that was completely random, the weather or something, you can start talking a little bit about intimate things. Now, intimate doesn't mean sexual. Intimate means something that is more vulnerable for you. Something that you may feel a bit, maybe it's a bit of a stretch. It's a bit outside of your comfort zone. And then see what you observe in the body language of the person. Do they withdraw? Do they see signs of discomfort? Or do they reciprocate? Do they show interest in what you are saying or what you are doing? So this is a dance, what I mean. And if you see that there is discomfort, then you take a step back. You go back to whatever you were doing before.
That's a lot to think about just in the like first 4 steps. How many more steps do we have?
I don't know off the top of my head, but they're not many, but I can just expand on them a little bit. I think that's pretty much it. It's just understanding that back and forth,
Right.
really.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like, okay, once expanded, it sounds like there's a lot to be aware of and be mindful of. But I think overall, it sounds like, so far, it sounds like the main gist of it is to be aware of yourself and the other party involved too. So what is the step? What do we do next?
So I think I'd like to spend a little bit more time on expanding this step, because I think it will really help people to get a sense of what it looks like in practice. So this step is called the last known good state. So that means that if I'm getting positive body language, eye contact, maybe relaxed body posture, easy breathing, initiating or reciprocating touch, then maybe I'm going to hang out where I am, or I may choose to escalate, go a little bit more. But if I'm getting a body language that is uncomfortable, maybe they're looking around, maybe they're looking away, maybe they're looking at their phone. So the body language is tense. Then I will go back to the previous step that they were showing positive signs. And if those signs of discomfort are still present, then I may verbalize that. I may say something like, it looks like I did something that made you feel uncomfortable. Or I'm noticing some discomfort. I'm wondering if you are too. And I think most people react really positively to showing, to seeing that the other person is actually interested in their comfort. And this is the psychological safety that I talked about before. So usually this can help de-escalate. This can create less awkwardness in the conversation. And then if it's resolved, then you can again do the dance again, escalate and see how things can go.
Right. So I see what you're saying now in terms of there being a balance, because that's, you've already kind of put it out there with the with that expression of desire, and then presenting the other party with an opportunity to express their discomfort and to kind of talk about their comfort levels creates that safe space. So once that has been established, what happens afterwards?
So I think one important step here that most people miss is creating an easy way out for the other person. So this is something like, maybe you went on the first date with someone and you can say something like this: if you're available and interested to explore things more, I would love to meet up for a drink. But if you're unavailable, I want you to know that I really enjoyed our conversation and I think you're an incredible person. Now, this is really important because when we feel that we have an exit psychologically, we are more likely to consider our options. But if the other person is really persistent with their expression of desire or what they want to go with this relationship, straight away, people get defensive.
Yeah. And what do you think? Why do you think people have kind of missed this step so much?
I think because we are probably not taught about these things at school or anywhere really. No one teaches us how to interact with other people, how to pursue another people for a romantic relationship or a sexual relationship. So I think it's just not knowing what to do, really.
Yeah, for sure. And with all of these steps that you've mentioned, you did give a scenario where it's like this is the initial flirting or seduction exchange. Do these steps stay the same, or do they alter a bit, slightly, depending on how many times it's happened before?
I think the foundations are the same. So it's basically about paying attention to the person's verbal and nonverbal cues, being grounded in your own desire, understanding that, or being connected with your sexuality. So the foundations and fundamentals are the same. It's just that maybe as the relationship progresses, they may look a little bit different. So when you want to escalate, maybe you've already got to a point that you are touching the person, maybe in in some non-sexual ways, maybe the shoulders or holding hands and things like that. And then escalation may be touching in parts that may feel a little bit more intimate, like the small of the back. So putting your hand there and then paying attention to their nonverbal or verbal cues. And just to make sure that we don't confuse consent. I think it's always the safest is to ask the person, is it okay if I put my hand on your back? But I want to say that verbal consent and verbal communication is not enough. We also need to pay attention to non-verbal. So if a person maybe verbally says yes, but the whole body language is tense and is saying no, then we need to pay attention to that too.
Yeah, for sure. And it also sounds like, you know, it's kind of like part of the seduction process is also making the other person feel comfortable. And so that's kind of in that sense, I think approaching it that way will probably be less daunting just because it's not a matter of like, or I've got to win this person over. It's like, how can I make this person feel as comfortable as they can? So do you have any advice on how to make someone feel as comfortable as possible? What are some things that we can say? Um,
I think making the other person comfortable is very contextual. So it depends on the context. It depends on the relationship that you may already have with the person. But it's in showing interest in their comfort that I think can convey the message that I am interested in you. So the suggestions that I gave you, if you sense some discomfort that maybe it escalated after you did something, verbalizing that and saying, I'm noticing some discomfort here. Maybe did I do something that made you uncomfortable? Or giving people exits and being respectful of if they're not interested and things like that. So it's being genuinely interested in the interest of other person.
Yeah, that is so interesting to me because I never thought about seduction that way. And I feel like seduction is rarely portrayed or seen by the masses as something that's like, um, you know, I'm genuinely interested in making you feel comfortable. And so people rarely think about that when it comes to seduction. So in that sense, it sounds like this is quite a big misconception when it comes to flirting and seduction. But what are some other misconceptions that you think need to be addressed?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that consent kills the mood. And that is a myth because it depends on how you ask for consent. Asking for consent and conveying consent can be very sexually arousing. So if you ask the person, can I kiss your neck or can I, whatever you want to do, ask them in a way that
Yeah.
it can be part of that seduction, part of that dance that we talked about. So that's one of the biggest myths. The other one, and specifically around consent, is that men only need to ask for consent. And that is, again, another myth. And asking for permission, it has to be done by everybody, regardless of your gender. So one of the myths around seduction is that, for example, men are always ready to have sex regardless of context, regardless of how they're feeling, regardless of the person. And so these myths, I think, create barrier for people to be truly connected to that sense of healthy sexuality within themselves and the pressure that they may feel, regardless of their gender, to engage in a sexual relationship or even in a romantic relationship.
Mhm. And do you have any advice for how to build that confidence when approaching seduction?
I think getting in touch with your own sexuality is number one, and trying to work through the barriers that may exist for you internally. Because, as I said, we live in a society that the dominant culture tells us that being sexual is a bad thing, although it's expected of everyone to be, but then the mixed message is there. So thinking about why would I think that being sexual, being sexy, being seductive is bad? And for women, having worked with many women, one of the main one is obviously they don't want to be shamed for that. And the other one is that I may get hurt. So if I express my desire to be sexual, to connect with someone sexually, I can get hurt. So then working through maybe with a trusted friend or with even a therapist, someone who's qualified to work through some of these psychological barriers that may exist. And when you are connected to your erotic self, to that true sexuality within you, you will naturally feel more confident.
That is really interesting. I think, yeah, what you said was so completely on the dot. I know like a lot of female friends and myself, we do have that like a bit of that anxiety and fear of potentially getting rejected. And so we don't want to make the first step. Do you have are there any coping mechanisms or like coping strategies that we can employ to help with that?
Yes, and I think that's a very common experience for most people, I would say, regardless of genders, because men also, they feel a lot of anxiety around being rejected because it's expected of them to initiate the things. And so I've worked with many men that feel that anxiety. And I think the first one is understanding that it's a common human experience having fear around being rejected. It's completely normal. No one wants to feel rejected. So every human being, they have some anxiety around being rejected. So you're not alone in that experience, acknowledging that for yourself. And then having some plans, support plans around you in case you get rejected, because we do. It's life, it's not just in romantic and sexual relationships, in professional relationships, friendships, you can get rejected. But identifying some support network for yourself that you can connect to after that rejection. For example, making sure that you reach out to your friends, have a chat with them. If you have professional support, reaching out to them. If there are hobbies that you do and they really energize you doing those things more. And maybe just, feeling a little bit miserable for a few days and life goes on. Just acknowledging that that's part of life and it's uncomfortable.
I love that advice. That's so on the point. I really like feel like you should just feel your feelings sometimes. You just have to, and it just makes it easier to kind of move on if you do acknowledge your feelings and be real with yourself. But before we end off the interview section, what are some key takeaways that you'd like our listeners to gain from this discussion?
Maybe number one is don't be afraid of your sexuality and try to connect with it in a healthy way. Try to get to know your erotic self and see where it wants to take you. Maybe just spend some time with your erotic self and get to know who this person is and what are their desires, what do they want. And then second of all is redefining seduction, that it's not just about I want to go and get this person or I want to go and get this thing. It's about creating that balance of safety, being genuinely interested in the other person, as well as expressing your desire and telling them what you want.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now we'll move on to the practices and habits section. And my first question for you is, what is a practice that you do in your romantic relationship when it comes to flirting?
In my personal life, one of the things that I do is prioritizing intimate time with my partner. And this is especially important if you are in a long-term relationship, because there is this myth that sex or intimate time should happen spontaneously. But that's a myth, because even when you think about when you're dating someone, you do a lot of planning ahead of time. You talk about when you're going to meet, where you're going to meet. You think about what am I going to wear? Am I going to groom myself? All these things. So it's the same in a long-term relationship. You need to set aside some time and plan ahead of time for some intimate time with your partner. And that doesn't necessarily mean sex. It's intimacy, however you want to define it. So that's something that I do in my personal life.
Yeah, that is such a good tip. So are there any challenges when it comes to trying to prioritize the intimate time?
Definitely. I think one of the main ones is if you have kids, they're obviously the priority in your life. And then connecting with your partner may become less of a priority, especially if you have young kids. So that's one of the big challenges that we have at the moment with my partner because we have a young baby. But it's just being conscious of that and being mindful of maybe creating smaller slots of time more frequently for connecting with each other.
Right, that is such a good tip. And I feel like when people in a relationship prioritize each other, especially amidst a busy life and a busy schedule, it also means more. And it might not be spontaneous, but it goes deeper than spontaneity, I guess. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing a bit about your personal life and what you do with your romantic relationship. Now we move on to the questions from the audience. We have one question today, and it is, why do people play hard to get? Does it actually work?
Playing hard to get, I think, just like I said before, there is an element of intent, an element of impact. So the person who is playing hard to get, we don't know. Are they really playing hard to get, or are they rejecting us? They're basically telling us that they're not interested. So this is something that we need to clarify and understand whether we think that they're playing hard to get. And the other one is that if I am the person who is playing hard to get, because that may be my intention, maybe that's what I've heard, that playing hard to get will actually get me something or it can make me more attractive or more desirable. So there's a little bit of truth to that, playing hard to get, but only a tiny bit, and I will explain what that is. So there is a formula in sexology that arousal is a combination of attraction plus a barrier. So if you're attracted to someone and there is a barrier, that can create arousal for you. So playing hard in that sense could a little bit, if you're attracted to the person and they're playing hard to get, create some sexual arousal for you. However, it's very risky, and I personally wouldn't recommend it because there is a lot of room for misunderstanding, for confusion, and sending mixed messages. And consent can get blurred, and the person may appear as, they're pestering the other person, they're harassing them. So my professional recommendation is that don't do that. There are other ways that you can seduce people.
Right. And the other person, when they find out that you're playing hard to get, might not be so pleased.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your professional opinion with us. Now we are going on to the open mic section, and this is your chance to talk about anything that you are passionate about. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
Okay, one project that I'm really passionate about is a book that I've recently published, and that is titled Raising Sexually Intelligent Kids. And this book has a focus on skills building for children versus what to tell them about sex, because this is a question that many parents have, like, what's the age that is appropriate to have these conversations? What should I tell my child? What if I see them doing this and that? So this book is for parents and caregivers and teaches them the skills that they need to teach their children to make informed decisions in their adulthood about their romantic relationships, about their sexual relationships. So that's something I'm really passionate about.
Oh, that sounds really, really exciting. So where can we find this book?
This book is available on my publisher's website, Routledge, or Amazon, or anywhere else, basically, that you can purchase books online. It's available on all platforms.
All right, we'll link that in the show notes. Now, before we end off, if our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
They can go to our website, relatesexology.com, and we've got all the information there.
All right, amazing. We'll link those in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Anisa, for joining us today. Your book sounds like an incredible project. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We hope you learned a bit more about the psychology of seduction, and maybe you can take a page or two or all of the pages from this episode. And we'll see you in the next one.
You've been listening to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at re.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.